Man, what a special edition of the Founding For podcast, as I am here with my co-founder and former co-host, Mike Murphy. How you doing, buddy?
I'm getting by, I think, as most people are just trying to do. You and I did a little catching up before we hit record, and we got to catch up with our families and everything. And I'm just stoked to be talking to you. Just hearing your voice, and I was like, oh man, where the hell has Erica been in my life? But I've just been following you, just doing what you do, hustling. Hardest working person I know in women's sports is Erica Ayala. So I am just thrilled to be talking to you, but I'm doing well. Everyone in my family's healthy, so thank goodness for that. I hope everyone listening has had that much good fortune, and if not, I hope things get better soon. I know it's been just a year from I don't even know where, but not a good place, but we're all just trying to get by, and I think that's what I've been trying to do. I've been just trying to keep busy, spending way too much time in Google Sheets, but yeah, I'm here.
Exactly. So I want to, before we move on, and this will be our way of transitioning to the big conversation that I want to have with you, Mike, but I'm not sure if you are familiar, but the Challenge Cup stats for the NWSL did not count towards the overall tally for NWSL players. And I'm just dying to know, as someone who really dives into the stats, like, how you feeling about that one, Mike?
It's so like I don't mean to bring it back to the NHL just by default, but like the NHL had a similar thing with, like, they had a play-in thing before the playoffs, which sounds like it might be what the N-Dub's going to do. And like, so what do we call those games? And like, I like to be a little sneaky and be like, well, anything that happens after the regular season is the postseason. So we can call it the playoffs. And so that is what my brain is going to do. And if anyone is going to tell me that the regular season of the N-Dubs doesn't count towards players' overall stats or the playoff stats, I will just disagree and do my own thing. Because my whole thing is, hold up, it happened. And it mattered. These games were of consequence. These achievements happened, goals, these assists happened, like, in the NWHL, like, this happened. We can't dismiss it. And there was, at the end of it, there's hardware. So we definitely can't dismiss it. And a lot of that stuff is so important to me because there's been a history in women's sports where things like stats were just not important. And doing things like making sure history is recorded is not important. So I think we need to take the opportunity, even if you want to put a little asterisk and say, just so you know, this wasn't a normal season or anything, go ahead. But when we look at, like, career stats and stuff, just say in all games, this is what this player did. Covers every base imaginable, except you can be like, what about exhibition games? And then I'll be like, those don't count.
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, Mike, it's important to let folks know that her hockey counts.
Oh! Queen of transitions, still in the game.
I'm still in the game. That stat counts, undefeated, always. But
I don't even need to count those ones.
I did want to, I know that's been your philosophy. I was very curious because I didn't know where you would land on that. I'm sure there's like a data reason why people would want to put that to the side. But for me, I'm like, a point is a point is a point is a point, right? So, but.
And we can learn, the big thing with data, not to interrupt you, is if you can learn from the data, then we should record the data. And that is data we can learn from. Is it a different setting? Of course it is. But like a good example is the N-Dubs. Like, one season we had 18 games. The next season we had 15 games. The next season we had 14 games. We even had a season where different teams had different amounts of regular season games.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean we throw out that season? No. The games happened. The stats happened. Sometimes players miss games. Do we throw out a player's stats because they missed a game? Of course not. We just need to record everything. That's the boring part, and the part that gives everyone a headache. Record everything and make sure you make the distinctions. This is this, this is that.
Right. And since I've known you, Mike, I've known that on your own time, on the side, you have been putting together stats and you have been trying to, again, make her hockey count. I mean, the presentations that you've done, the conversations that you have, what you write about the importance of data. And I know I've told this to you before. Anyone who's listened to the podcast, when I talk about numbers, knows I'm like, not my vibe, not my thing. But I understand how important they are. And I wonder if part of the reason is because we think of women's hockey in a very specific way. And so if we're not counting NWHL stats, if we're not counting PWHPA stats, if those stats are not available, then how can you make a case for someone like a Kelly Babstock when it's her time to be eligible? Because she's never played in an Olympics. She's never played at a world championship. And so I think even from a stats perspective, the pool is already small because, women, but now you make it even smaller when you only think of women's hockey in essentially two very distinct ways, and that's two international tournaments.
Yeah, and it's so funny you say that because her hockey count started with me just, just putting up all the stuff that I had done. And then I started working on, I wanted to work on kind of historical stuff. And I was writing an article about just how good was Haley Wickenheiser, and just how good was Angela James. And Angela James led me to looking at elite prospects, and some of the data was missing for her. And I was like, well, that's just, I can't sleep anymore. How do we not have all of Angela James' stats? And then because I asked that question that you asked, which is an important one, because in the world of the Hockey Hall of Fame on the men's side, it's a Hockey Hall of Fame not just for the NHL, but you have your international tournaments, but then you have your success largely achieved in the NHL. So there's something of a standard, right? You have greatness in terms of production or awards, individual accolades, and then longevity. Players get a lot of credit for longevity. And in women's hockey, longevity might look like you played until you're 28. And then you have the issue of there being multiple leagues that you could play in. And then you have some of the best women playing in men's leagues. And then you have all these other things what about a player who's in youth sports? What about a player who took the path of the NCAA? What about all these amazing women who played before there was women's college hockey? And they were still among the very best players in the world. And that all led me to looking at the historical data and really being listen, we at least need goals, assist points for skaters and saves and shots against for goalies. That was my bottom line. We need to do this so we can say, why isn't this player in the Hall of Fame? And that all started with me with Angela James because I couldn't find her stats. And that to me was just that's criminal to me.
You can be a casual fan of almost any men's sport and be able to easily access all of that.
Yeah.
As a women's sports,
yeah.
Exactly. As a women's sports fan, you definitely don't have that. And you're lucky if you have it as a player, if you have it as a program or a team, you're lucky.
Yeah, you're really lucky.
Think about the type of world that we live in where everything, we want it at the touch of a fingertip, and so much of conversations, especially now, right, are happening digitally. Even if you're not down with the numbers, if you want to make a case for the growth of women's hockey, you have to make people want to talk about it. And I know a lot of people are trying to make that argument for gambling. Like I mentioned in passing, I'm really just not into the gambling. It's not my vibe. Maybe that's because, it's the numbers. I'm just nope, I'm going to keep my money because I know how to count to that much. But I think that's the case that gambling is trying to make to get into the sports space and to make that, less of a stigma. I feel sorry for you, Pete Rose. I'm thinking about you all the time.
Ooh.
I know. Controversy. Let's not talk about baseball controversies. That'll be another 40
All I
minute
need to mention is the DH too.
Come on.
Into some stuff I've done at the Ice Garden. I've done kind of a series. It's called Rewind, where I'll look at an older women's world championship and I'll look at the data because I just spent a week or two looking at it all, and then I'll come away with a story And one of my favorite ones was USA's first gold they won. They won it in a tournament where Canada didn't allow a goal in regulation or overtime, but they finished with a silver medal because they lost in a shootout in the gold medal game. Imagine not allowing a goal in an entire tournament and you come home with silver. That's gotta suck. That's not what I wrote in the story, which it hasn't gone up yet. But really, that's the too long didn't read version of it. That's gotta suck. But yeah, like that's a fun place to look at some of the work. I also a lot of the stuff I've worked on in terms of I looked at the development and aging curves and things like that of collegiate hockey players. I've written over at Hockey Graphs. I'm a contributor there. Alyssa also has some great work over there. So they do have some really cool women's hockey analytics articles there at Hockey Graphs. So definitely, if you're interested in that, you can check it out. And other than that, every once in a while I'll tweet something out on Twitter, but I've tried to make an effort to make the home for my stuff for hockey counts, because it used to be just, Erica, here's a link to this Google sheet I made. You can share it with anyone in media who needs it. And by the way, I have 400 of these Google sheets, and I realized maybe I should put this all in one place. So that's how everything got to where we got to.
I love it. I love it. Again, we're going to make sure to have all of the links available.
Thank you.
I look forward to using a lot of this information more regularly. And, we talked about the bubble, don't know who's going to the bubble, but I do hope that they are able to find a way to broadcast. And, just a reminder that Erica's available.
Hey!
Hey. But, honestly, though, another thing that we saw when it came to women's sports with coronavirus happening is that actually women's sports were able to increase the number of games that they had nationally televised. And then people tried to make stats arguments as to, but the pandemic is why people were watching more. I was like, okay, then why did the men's numbers go down? And they were like,
Well, then why did the numbers stay up the whole time?
Yeah, exactly.
You're telling me they didn't get bored of the women's sports? That's funny.
That's wild. But also,
Is that some bullshit coming out of your mouth? I'm sorry.
A lot of men's sports fans, I'm not going to call them men, although my eye test tells me they tend to skew that way, but men's sports fans who don't understand and appreciate women's sports oftentimes like to make the argument, well, those numbers are nothing compared to men. The whole argument, though, is that the numbers exponentially increased. Why? Because there were more nationally televised games. So although I would love to announce and be part of the media for the N double, I would also absolutely love to see the NWHL be able to elevate and get these games out in a wider breadth and have a bigger catchment area, because again, we've seen
or put them on ESPN and then ESPN hires Erica.
I am okay with that as well.
See, that's the other plan that I'm a big fan of. Is like we can have both, Erica.
Let's do it, right? Why limit ourselves? Why
say one or the other when we can have both? Yeah, it's very fun. Thank you so much for calling attention to it. I always love talking to you, and it was a real pleasure to be here.
All right, we got it done. That was fantastic. Always love chatting with you.
Yeah, I feel like we could do like 3 more hours.
Oh, so. Easy.